Number 10. Healing tied to mental state. Now most everyone knows about Deadpool's enhanced healing factor and how he can heal from pretty much anything. He's been decapitated, he's been turned to a puddle of goo, and then he had to drink cable, it was a whole thing. But did you know that how effective his healing factor is tied to his mental state? So he heals faster and more well-handedly when he is not only conscious, cause then there is some intent behind the power, but if he is unconscious or depressed, then it can be much slower. Which is actually a state Deadpool occupies more than some people think, as he has a lot more to him than just quirky fourth wall breaks. His first series by Joe Kelly, the one that began to define him and move him away from the Deathstroke ripoff he began as under Liefeld, actually had a lot of angst and sad Deadpool, sitting in the shower and the like. Deadpool has range. Number 9. Invulnerable to telepathy. So Deadpool's healing factor actually renders him resistant, extremely resistant to telepathy. That's because the neurons in his head are in a constant state of flux, with his dying cells being rejuvenated at an accelerated rate. However, this is a sometimes, who's writing Deadpool ability, meaning that the level of resistance can vary. Still, even if a telepath can get in there, they can rarely make sense of everything going on, especially back when Deadpool still had multiple caption boxes. Number 8. Mimicry, from the Ultimate Verse. So we're going over to the Ultimate Verse for this one, where characters had different abilities and the like, just cuz, fresh slate, etc. The Ultimate Universe was a comic line started by Marvel in order to create a jumping on point for new readers, who may be intimidated by the huge backlog of Marvel canon. It would of course eventually develop a large backlog of its own, and be done in by some large, questionable events. Many fans will point to the very gory Ultimatum as the turning point. The Deadpool of the Ultimate Verse was a cyborg who could mimic people's appearances and voices, but not powers, so close, but no life model decoy. Still, you could pass as another person like that for a while, if no harrowing situation came up, and they weren't a person who just used their powers willy-nilly. Number 7. Immortal. Deadpool is effectively immortal, and for a time that was independent of his healing factor, though that of course helped. Rather, he had been cursed by Thanos, who was jealous of his relationship with Death, cause Death had quite the fondness for Wade, and for Thanos not so much. However, over time it has shifted to Deadpool's healing factor just being so intense there is no stopping it. So his time with Death is fleeting. They share brief moments until he returns to the land of the living. He even low-key cheated on his wife with her. This is when he had her kill him so he could go help resurrect Peter Parker, who he had killed, under mistaken instructions that he was a villain. I say low-key because he was high-key emotionally cheating with Peter in their series Deadpool/Spider-Man. But then, him and his wife ended up divorcing for reasons explained in another book that you were also supposed to be reading, because give Marvel all of your money, so it was fine. Number 6. Invulnerability to pain. Now there have been different schools of thought on this one. One is that Deadpool is in constant pain because of his cancer's never-ending battle with his healing factor, hence he is in a way numb to everything going on around him. The second is that the constant flux of his healing factor deadens him to pain, since his surface is never truly stable and his skin is always in flux. Either way, Deadpool can take a lot of punishment, being able to quip his way through being disemboweled or dismembered, or even just a floating head, and we're not just talking about Headpool. Number 5. Super strength? So this factoid tends to arise from the fact that Deadpool has lifted the hammer of Thor. Let me explain. Firstly, some would take this to mean that he is worthy, while others would have it mean that it must be strong, because no way should Deadpool be able to lift that hammer except for comedic purposes. Which is of course what this was. You had Deadpool in the little winged helmet with a cape, manipulated by Loki into stealing the hammer. But here's the thing, he never actually had Thor's hammer. Loki cloaked the real hammer and then transformed Deadpool's clothes. However, that aside, in general, many fans feel that the feats Deadpool accomplishes require some form of super strength in order for him to pull them off. What do you think? Super strength or just years of murking people? Number 4. Hulkpool. This character appears in the comic Hulked Out Heroes. He is a gamma irradiated version of Deadpool. So a Hulk Deadpool, all that power and rage and strength and Hulkness, being sent to kill his original Deadpool because he was a murderer with no remorse, alternate timeline things. This was a whole world of Hulks, hence the title of the series. Hulkpool travels around time, finding himself in World War II, eventually kills the alternate Deadpool and makes his way back to the main verse with the help of his friend Bob the Hydra Agent. Oh, Hydra Bob. Now there's a fun character. Very venture bros, just low-level grunts in huge organizations trying to get by. Number 3. Venom pool. The Venomverse graced the world with many Venoms from all over. So this version of Deadpool comes from the edge of the Venomverse, like the edge of the Spider-Verse, get it? So he was investigating a warehouse full of parasitic worms and ended up bonding with the symbiotes that he could expel the worms who had attached themselves to him, which of course gave him all the powers of a symbiote. So of course the constructs, the excess strength, and agility. Venom pool would be willingly absorbed by a member of the poison species, the natural predators of the Clintar, aka symbiotes. And as a result, he would become Poison Deadpool, so that he could be a double agent, cause no matter the universe, Deadpool is Deadpool. Watch out. Number 2. Caption boxes. For a period of Deadpool's history, he had multiple narration boxes, and they all had different voices and typesets and colors, and would tell him different things. It was thought for a while that this was the manifestation of a power that allowed him to be aware of the fourth wall, and also assess situations from a variety of angles. It would later be revealed that the caption boxes were actually different characters in his head, being caused when Deadpool has regenerated near someone who was also for all intents and purposes dead. So he has merged them. So Madcap, a Captain America villain, was the more psychotic voice, while the other voice was never properly identified, though some claim was Deadpool's psychiatrist. So Deadpool, he can absorb people and keep their consciousnesses alive. Terrifying. And number 1. Enter white space. Deadpool can move with ease in Gwenpool's white space, and as seen in the series Gwenpool Strikes Back, can lead the way into it. The white space is a metatextual space where Gwenpool operates, observing, changing, and mocking the Marvel world. Deadpool was able to inhabit it, understand it, and create a flowchart within it. It makes sense, what with his meta-awareness, that he should be able to move with ease in such a space. However, everything except the end retcon which happened in that series needs to be taken with a grain of salt, as the author said via Gwen in the story that it was meant to be future-proof. Still, Deadpool was there, and he did it.
Number 10. Kinetic energy. While some who are less familiar with Gambit just think of him as a man with card tricks, the truth is that he is so much more than that. His power isn't just throwing explosive cards, though it might appear that way to the uninformed eye. Gambit's true powers are to kinetically charge any object that he comes into contact with, setting it to explode on impact or time the explosion. He once charged his gum that he was chewing in his mouth and spat it at an enemy when it seemed that he would otherwise be a goner, with a sword at his throat. Ooh. Guess Gambit is lucky he wasn't in Singapore, where importation and selling of gum is illegal. True facts. While he may seem super in control of these powers, he actually constantly fears that he isn't, and even made a deal with Mr. Sinister to help him have more control over them. Yet in the comics, the control he does demonstrate is pretty impressive, making one wonder what a fully in control Gambit would be capable of. We're getting there, we're getting there. Number 9. Poker Master. Remy's love of cards comes from his thieving background. He grew up stealing and gambling and actually earned quite a bit of money doing so, but more about his wealth another time. As such, he has an insane level of skill as a poker player. We see him beat out his X-Men squad in a friendly tournament in X-Men Volume 2, issue 48. It comes down to him and Sam Guthrie, aka Cannonball, who insisted he'd actually never played before, but actually has been playing poker for years with his siblings before coming to the X-Men. Yeah, I've tried that before, Sam, with Catan, so I know your tricks. And he is actually a bit of a pro himself. But even he is no match for Remy. When it seems like Gambit accidentally charged the cards on purpose to make them explode so he wouldn't have to reveal his full final hand, we find out that although he forfeits, he had the winning hand, and chose to throw the game in favor of Sam, as Storm picks up the remnants of his smoking ace, which would have given him a royal flush to Sam's full house. And if you play poker like I do, you should know, royal flush is like the best you can get. Royal flush. Number 8. Super reflexes and agility. Have you ever noticed how Gambit almost never misses when throwing one of his cards? Or how he almost never gets hit when others are aiming for him? This is because he has superior reflexes and agility. His movements are basically acrobatic. This helps him as a Master Thief as well, often allowing him to sneak into places and out unnoticed. And it allows him to dodge lasers on a Matrix level, and bullets on a Matrix level actually as well. He has also been able to avoid getting hit by projectiles himself and save others from getting hit by simply being quick enough to catch them, and often throw them back at the people that aim them at him. Number 7. Bojutsu. When Gambit first made his appearance in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1, issue 266, he actually was not seen using his famous playing cards. Instead, we met Gambit with metal spikes in hand, almost like darts. Like many of his fellow mutants, first appearances can be deceiving, and many of the X-Men needed some time to evolve and settle before becoming the iconic characters we know them as today. I mean, look at how much Beast has changed from his first appearance. And in fact, while we've come to know Gambit for his explosive playing cards, he is also skilled with weapons as well, specifically his bow staff. His accuracy both with his staff staff, and anything he chooses to turn into a projectile is impressive. He rarely misses his targets and even is accurate and skilled enough to use his staff to deflect bullets, and powerful enough to destroy a danger room bot with one swift blow of his staff. Number 6. Savate. Aside from his skill with his staff, Remy LeBeau is also skilled with his hands as well. I mean, his fists. His fists. He is a master of savate. What does that mean? It means that he is a French kickboxing master. What makes French kickboxing different from English kickboxing? Well, I'm not sure. I assume it's similar, but in French? Oui oui, mon chéri. It's actually like standard kickboxing, but it's more graceful. Fun fact. His hits would also be more powerful using this technique, as he has a supercharged metabolism that makes his strikes land with more force. Nick Fury even said that Gambit was one of the best hand-to-hand fighters he had ever seen. Number 5. Hypnotic charm. Have you ever wondered why so many ladies have the hots for Gambit? Well, it could be because of this subtle and sometimes lesser known ability. Remy is charming just on his own, but he also possesses a power known as hypnotic charm. This power allows him to have slight control over another being through the power of suggestion, basically like Cajun Jedi mind tricks. He can suggest something to you that you might be inclined to follow through with or agree with him on. Some have even suggested that he may have used his influence to make Rogue fall for him. However, this power is not particularly strong, so it is unlikely that this theory is true, and more likely that the two just fell in love organically. Because as soon as someone becomes aware of this power, it ceases to work on them any longer. And it's likely that Rogue, after all this time, would both know about Remy's hypnotic and natural charms. Number 4. Mental defense. Gambit's ability to manipulate kinetic energy means that he is almost always surrounded by it, which grants him an electrostatic field. This basically acts like a mental shield and protects him from those who would probe his thoughts. Professor X once likened trying to get into Remy's mind to trying to hold on to a bunch of snakes, and Psylocke has also struggled when it comes to breaking through Gambit's mental defenses. It doesn't help that Gambit also specifically will focus on misleading thoughts when he feels someone trying to make their way into his mind, which only makes attempting to use telepathy on him feel even more impossible and frustrating. Number 3. Healing factor. While this has never been explicitly confirmed, we have seen Gambit both withstand and recover from a number of devastating blows within a short amount of time. It has been suggested that he may be able to harness kinetic energy in order to heal himself, which might also explain in how Bishop's timeline he survived long enough to be an elderly man who remembered the X-Men and was known as the Witness. If he was actually the Witness, that is. That theory has really never been fully confirmed or denied. Number 2. Molecular manipulation. On the alternate Earth of 9921, Gambit becomes New Sun. New Sun is basically Gambit with his powers unlocked to his full potential. This version of him was so powerful he ended up killing his Earth's Phoenix. His kinetic powers far surpass those of his Earth 616 counterpart, to the point that he can manipulate kinetic energy on a molecular level. He could heat up molecules or cool them down, and could stop a person dead in their tracks. And he no longer had to touch objects to make them explode. He could even transform himself into energy, manipulating his own molecules and converting himself into energy waves. Number 1. Toxic conversion. During Gambit's run as Apocalypse's Horseman of Death, Gambit had this power. He agreed to be one of Apocalypse's horsemen, believing that Apocalypse would be the salvation of the mutants, and that if Apocalypse turned on them, that Gambit would be able to stop him. Fortunately, didn't quite work out as Remy had hoped, and he ended up actually attacking his former teammates, the X-Men. As a result of this transformation, he gained the power to transform air into deadly poison, even once threatening to do so to his own master, Apocalypse, after regaining his sense of self and remembering who he truly was.
Starting us off in at number 10, Pyrotechnic Energy Blasts. So let's start off with that power that we all know Jubilee has, but actually explain it, since she's often considered to be a character whose powers are confusing. Jubilee's firework power is actually something called pyrotechnic, or lumikinetic, energy blasts. The blasts are called plasmoids, and they come from her hands obeying her mental control and traveling where she directs them. She can arrange them in various shapes and cause them to explode at will. They vary in terms of intensity. They can temporarily blind a person, smash an object, or with precision can burst inside of a human brain, which simulates a stroke. Yeah, that's actually pretty scary. And at number 9, she can absorb energy. Now this one actually riffs off of our last number. Jubilee can absorb the energy from her pyrotechnic blasts. She's capable of absorbing the blasts back into her own body without causing herself any harm. Now this ability does not extend to other energy blasts though. It's only her own plasmoids that she can control in this way. Still, pretty nifty trick to have up your sleeve. While we're on the topic though, let's dive into our next number. In at number 8, she can explosively charge objects. Emma Frost once described Jubilee as having a very powerful untapped ability that riffs off of what she can do with her pyrotechnic blasts. Jubilee is able to detonate her plasmoids at will, causing explosions strong enough to destroy property. Now in X-Men Volume 2, issue 36 from 1994, Frost speculated that based on what Jubilee could already do, she could potentially take that one step further, detonating matter at a subatomic level, which arguably could be the equivalent of detonating a nuclear fusion bomb. That is an immense amount of power Jubilee would prefer not to tap into though. During the Acts of Vengeance storyline in Uncanny X-Men, Jubilee caused a massive explosion that destroyed the Mandarin's mansion when she was experiencing grief over Wolverine's alleged death. She fears killing someone if her powers were to flare up like that again. Now other alternate versions of Jubilee don't really have the same issues with her morality though. The Age of Apocalypse Jubilee made full use of her powers, detonating clothing on foes on a molecular level to cause fatal explosions. She even blows up a Shi'ar ship all on her own in Gambit and the Externals issue 1. Moving on to number 7, Wondra. So, after M-Day and the House of M event, Jubilee was completely depowered. She wasn't one of the mutants that Charles Xavier managed to save. Didn't make the 198, did she? She became rather depressed because of this, and attempted several different jobs before she found her way back onto a superhero team. This time, it being the New Warriors, a version of the team made up of depowered mutants. New team, new persona. Jubilee would adopt the name Wondra using advanced tech that she got from Night Thrasher in order to give her an upper hand, and superhuman strength. This upgrade let Jubilee, aka Wondra, lift the engine of a freight train over her head. She also had tech that allowed her to fly via hover discs, letting her travel at 100 miles per hour and still breathe normally. Moving on to number 6, force fields. One of the other abilities that her new Wondra tech gave her was the power to create force fields. Specifically, her suit gave her the ability to create force fields. The gloves on her Wondra suit generate a powerful electromagnetic field around her, and within this force field she is incredibly resistant to physical injury. The force fields could withstand extreme temperatures, high caliber bullets, energy blasts, and much more. Once again, I would like to reiterate, where do I get one of these suits? Moving on to number 5, Ghost Mode. A little more on that Wondra tech at this number. So, Jubilee's suit had something called Ghost Mode, or at least something that she referred to as Ghost Mode. This mode allows her to render herself intangible, not dissimilar to Kitty Pryde's mutant ability. When Jubilee is using this mode, she can pass through any object or substance without being hurt, making her practically untouchable when this mode is activated. Apparently, it was added to her suit as an emergency escape function if she ever needed to get away when in a bind. Jubilee would eventually leave the New Warriors when she discovered that Night Thrasher had ulterior motives with the team, thus ditching the suit. But fret not, she would soon be given a new set of powers, which we will get to shortly on our list. Before we do though, let's move on to number 4. She is an Olympic-level gymnast. Similar to many other X-Men members, Jubilee has developed skills from training outside of her mutant power set. In Generation X issue 24, we learn that her skill in gymnastics is really above and beyond the average fit superhero. She actually qualified for the Olympic Games prior to her parents' murders. She also learned a lot about hand-to-hand combat from her pal Wolverine. Up next, number 3, she can evade telepathic detection. In Jubilee's earlier comic appearances, she depicted an immunity to telepathy. In Generation X issue 27 and 28 from 1997, Jubilee uses this ability to hide from mental probes of Sentinels, and from telepathic scans. Unfortunately, this skill would be abandoned by creative teams later on. Now this immunity is sometimes referred to as psionic shields, a natural defense of hers that renders her mind slippery and therefore somewhat invisible to telepathy users unless they know exactly what to look for. Let's move on to talking about those new powers of hers. In at number 2, she was a vampire. Back in the very early 2000s, Jubilee was transformed into a vampire. If you're scratching your head and wondering, how the hell did that happen? Well, yeah, it was thanks to a bit of a convoluted story arc in which Dracula's son, Zaris, turned her. And it was the result of her being depowered thanks to that House of M event. This meant that she had all of the abilities that vampires in the Marvel Universe generally have. We're talking superhuman strength, speed, and accelerated healing factor. Oh, and immortality, of course. Can't forget that one. And last but not least, in at number 1, she could turn into vapor. This is another ability of Jubilee's that she picked up thanks to her vampire transformation. She can turn into vapor on command. Ah, those tricky vampires. I mean, technically it is called mist mimicry. These days, this isn't a move that she can pull off anymore though. Her regular powers were restored in 2018 in Generation X issue 86, after a foe ripped off the amulet that allowed her to walk around in the daylight. And Quentin Quire ended up saving her using a shard of the Phoenix Force that he had to restore her back to what she originally was in her pre-vamp days. So now Jubilee is back to normal, with all the powers that we mentioned from 10 to like 5.
Number 10. Immortality. While this superpower hasn't been confirmed, I think after all this time we can assume it's highly possible without it having to be stated in the comics. If you haven't read anything X-Men or Mystique, you may not know that she has been alive for likely 200 plus years. She met her greatest love, the mutant Destiny, around the turn of the century when she already appeared to be a grown adult. The hard thing about Mystique though is because she can change her appearance, it's hard for us to determine just how old she is, and some have theorized that she could even be ancient in age. As her codename implies, she is a mysterious character. We don't even know if her assumed natural state and look are actually even natural. We may have never even yet seen Mystique's true face unchanged. She may not even have one. She may not even have been born a woman, who knows? Mystery, mystery, mystery. Number 9. Deception and distraction. While it may not seem like a superpower, Mystique definitely makes it feel like one at the level she works at. She has deceived even those that most would deem undeceivable. At one point she was able to create a situation wherein a whole town was deceived into attacking Wolverine after she deceived him by making him kill an innocent woman who he thought was Mystique in disguise. She also was able to use her level of deception and distraction to delay fights in order to get the upper hand on her assailants, by often transforming into a little girl. While you would think many would know that Mystique was messing with them, especially because some of them actually saw her transform, she is so convincing as a helpless little girl that she is often able to use this to gain that upper hand, seemingly innocent until proving just why she is so deeply deadly. Number 8. Grows clothing. I feel like this is one we should all know about, but it's an easy one to forget as well. I constantly forget about it until I am grossly reminded that, oh yeah, all those clothes Mystique appears to be wearing are actually a part of her. This was a huge thing in the X-Men films, although in the Ultimate Universe this is actually very much not a thing. Mystique actually has to make sure that she has clothes, as she cannot like transform her body magically into clothes. What I've always wondered is when she takes off an article of clothing, like her jacket, does that mean she's like shedding skin? What's happening there? Number 7. Size altering. While Mystique may be able to change shape and size, this was originally limited to those who were around a similar build to her. Her powers in terms of changing shape were relatively limited when she first was introduced. Over time, however, Mystique has honed her shapeshifting power and has had more of her true potential unlocked. This happened during her time in the X-Men Forever comics, when she saw her power level dramatically increased in the capacity of changing size. She was then able to make herself gigantic in proportion. Based on what we've seen here and there over the years, since this development, she should be able to adjust her size on pretty much an Ant-Man level. But unfortunately, this seems to be a power that many writers leave unutilized, so it doesn't come up a lot. Probably because it would make her too similar to Ant-Man himself. And we'd all rather see Mystique shapeshift into everyday looking people or mutants most days, rather than, you know, giant versions of them. Or giant versions of herself. Or microscopic versions of herself, or really tiny versions of herself. You know what I mean. Number 6. Improvisation and acting. Many may think it would be easy to be villain Raven Darkholme. All you have to do to beat the good guys, or when you're being good, the bad guys, is shapeshift into someone else and everything is pretty much almost done for you. But what people often forget is Mystique does not gain the memories of those she changes into. So her trickery and shapeshifting is more of an art than you'd think. Beyond looking like someone, she often has to play the role of the person she is imitating well enough to convince those around her. Sometimes people who know that target intimately. And she's managed to successfully pull this off on multiple occasions, even when the person she's imitating is like a genius scientist, or even if she's convincing the romantic partners of those she imitates in the bedroom as well. Phantom X seemed pretty convinced when she slept with him while under the guise of Psylocke, so. Number 5. Shapeshift into animals. Not only can Mystique shapeshift into other beings, but once her power level was increased in the comics, she also found it possible to shapeshift beyond humanoids. She could give herself tentacles, turn into animals, give herself wings, and even once turn into a sheet of paper in order to survive an explosion. Making oneself almost two-dimensional and as flat as a sheet of paper is pretty impressive. Though thankfully that sheet of paper didn't catch fire in the explosion. I feel like, you know, there'd be a risk of that. While in the comics she did not possess this level of shapeshifting abilities immediately, in the X-Men Evolution animated series she started off being at this level with her powers. Mystique has even used her shapeshift abilities to make internal changes to her body, shifting vital organs around to protect them from getting damaged from injuries. Number 4. Super strength. What some people might not think about is the fact that Mystique has been shown to shapeshift on a molecular level. What does this mean for her abilities? It means that she can adjust her strength levels pretty much as she sees fit, and that when she appears to have more muscle, it's not just for show. She can actually use that muscle. Because of this, we have seen Mystique both while disguised and while not disguised do all sorts of crazy things. She once caught a kick from Sabretooth and tossed him through a window like a rag doll, and she has killed people with one punch. And she even one time broke Forge's cybernetic leg with a single kick. Ouch. Number 3. Healing factor. While her healing factor isn't super powerful, it still exists. Let's not forget that Mystique's mutant powers allow her to change appearance, changing her body. By extension, she can also use the same power to heal non-lethal wounds by closing them up. This ability does require a good amount of focus and energy on Mystique's part, however, which is why the idea of healing something more serious is so difficult. The injury itself would take energy and focus away from her. It has been stated before in the comics, but very rarely, leaving many to ponder on if her healing factor is really a thing, as it's not really super consistent. But for those who doubt, I'll remind you that Mystique is pretty old, and she isn't one to shy away from the fight, leaving us to believe that she must have a healing factor if she has been in physical fights more often than not during her lifespan. And I think we can all agree that she likely has. She's pretty much consistently fighting people. Number 2. Telepathic immunity. During Mystique's series of the same name, Mystique Ultimate, we get a more in-depth look at Raven's mind and abilities as she works alongside Charles Xavier. One thing we learn from her close interaction with Charles is that her mind is basically unreadable when it comes to telepathy, adding to her ability to become, well, just about anyone. Charles himself attests that her mind is too chaotic to read, too erratic. It's like it's constantly being reshaped and reformed. So apparently her shapeshifting abilities also grant this secondary telepathic resistance as well, guarding her against being easily found out while under disguise. If you want more insight into just how much work goes into wielding this power and honing it, you should check out X-Men Black, Mystique, which delves into Mystique's perspective when it comes to all that is involved behind the scenes. Number 1. Scent altering. For all of her time in the comics, Mystique definitely is the type to hold grudges, and definitely see them carried forward throughout. One such person she has had a big issue with throughout her history is Wolverine. These two have been on and off again lovers, enemies, and occasionally partners for at least 90 plus years. We see them meet in the 2003 Wolverine series in 1921 Mexico, bonding over the fact that they are both prisoners sentenced to death. Their long-standing relationship would at one point end in Raven's death at Wolverine's hands as revenge for her sending him to hell. Her death, of course, was short-lived, because comics. Her body was recovered and auctioned off to the Hand who resurrected her. When she returned from the dead, she was even more powerful than ever, and while her scent could normally be used to give her away, even while disguised to Wolverine, who had even used her scent to track her before, she now possessed the ability to adapt her scent to those whose form she took, making her an even more powerful shapeshifter, nigh undetectable. Can't detect her thoughts, you can't detect her smell. What can you detect? Nothing. Number 10. Ninja Assassin Fighting Skills. Though she uses her telekinetic abilities a lot in a fight, and I mean a lot, Betsy doesn't need to rely on them to beat someone in hand-to-hand combat. Her skills as a ninja assassin have been reinforced on a few different occasions. At one point she was trained by the Hand, but she also inhabited the body and, for a while, kind of the mind of Quanon, a skilled ninja assassin, whose body she swapped with in a controversial and pretty ridiculous storyline, and who also seemed to have purple hair, possibly even natural purple hair, as opposed to Betsy's original's body's dyed purple hair. Betsy also became such a skilled assassin that she even admitted during her time on Cable's X-Force that she was addicted to killing. So, you know, she's like a super assassin. Anyways, she tries not to kill people anymore. Number 9. Telepathic link and twin bond. This power feels like it's almost based off of folklore. Betsy and her twin brother Brian share a unique connection. They have a strong telepathic link to one another. This link has actually helped the twins to sense when the other is in danger and rush to their side to help them. People have often believed that the time shared in the womb actually allows twins in the real world to share an almost psychic link to one another, sensing one another's emotions or physical states, even while separated. Studies have even actually been conducted on this subject, and while I don't think it makes a lot of sense scientifically speaking, I know that my twin sisters have experienced some pretty freaky twin telepathy moments, so maybe there's a real world thing to this, I don't know guys. Beyond being linked to her brother, Psylocke has the capacity to be linked with just about anyone. When her mutant powers actually surfaced, she found herself instantly and overwhelmingly telepathically connected to millions of people. Not having much control control over her powers just yet. This caused her much grief initially, though it has proved a useful power throughout her development. Number 8. She's a spy. Psylocke is a master of shadows for many reasons, one including her prowess as a spy. She worked as a spy agent on the Psi division of Strike, the special tactical reserve for international key emergencies. Well, for a time. An oddly, conveniently cool acronym for what was basically MI6 with a wider net. During her time working as a Psi agent for Strike, she would plot to infiltrate the Hellfire Club. She worked on the Strike Force undercover, with her cover life being that of a working fashion model, pun intended. This was also the time we saw Betsy make a dramatic change to her hair. Up until this point it always matched her twin brother Brian, aka Captain Britain's blonde color, but she would then start dyeing it purple and never look back. Her purple hair has since become an iconic part of her look. Number 7. Astral projection. Using her telepathy, Psylocke can project her astral form, allowing her to explore the astral or physical plane outside of her body. While in the astral plane, she can use her abilities to alter the environment around her, and even create psionic weapons, much like she can while inhabiting her body on the physical plane. There was even a time when she was undetectable in her astral form. That being said, she can easily be harmed while in her astral form when facing those who are stronger than her, like in Uncanny X-Men Volume 1 when she went up against Mr. Sinister. Number 6. Force fields. Beyond having the physical and tactical skills to take down an opponent, Psylocke can also guard against physical attacks when she wants to, and even shield herself from things like magical explosions or fire. Using her telekinesis ability, she can construct a force field around herself and others to protect from incoming attacks. It isn't an effortless ability, however, as it does require a lot of mental strength and focus on her part. Number 5. Psionic blasts. In a fight against Archangel, Psylocke used this newfound power to knock him out. Her psionic blasts can be deadly actually, despite the fact that they don't really inflict physical damage. Instead, these blasts attack Psylocke's opponents mentally, though they can still inflict mental pain. Psylocke is also capable of wielding the psionic energy on such a level that she could create an explosion. Psionic explosions! Number 4. Magic immunity. After Jamie Braddock resurrected Psylocke, she was brought back with some different abilities. While she no longer had her shadow teleportation power, she found she was now immune to telepathic or telekinetic interference, and Jamie even insisted that she had a resistance to magic, specifically reality-altering magic. He apparently had made sure she was brought back with these resistances, as he needed her in order to defeat the Forsaken. Number 3. Pilot. While it might not be as interesting as some of her other professions and power sets based around being a spy and, a ninja, way before any of that happened, back in the original Captain Britain Volume 1, Betsy was known for her skills as a pilot. Truth be told, we never really got to see said skills, but they were acknowledged by her brother Brian Braddock. Betsy seemed more to downplay them, and then while flying, a light kinda hit her and caused her to hallucinate, and then she crashed. Not really her fault, but it didn't really add any hype to this ability. Still, based on what Brian said in issue 8 of Volume 1, we can't assume that Betsy was an accomplished charter pilot. Just never really got to see a lot of it. Number 2. Flight. You may know of Psylocke's famous butterfly aura that surrounds her eyes and face while using her telekinetic abilities. Likewise, she can also use her telekinesis to give herself metaphorical wings and allow her to take flight, though she is also sometimes pictured with that neon pink butterfly wing-like aura on her back while soaring around. So sometimes it does actually look like she has wings, telekinetic wings, which is also kind of fitting considering how romantically close she and fellow X-Men Angel have been over the years. This seems to be an ability that writers sometimes also forget about though, so she doesn't use it that frequently. You can see her take flight in the Uncanny X-Men series from 2016, volume number 4, if you want to see that, which I mean, who doesn't want to see Psylocke fly? It's super cool. Number 1. Invisibility. When you think of Psylocke, you may think of her stealth abilities. She is a spy, a ninja, an assassin, and has been known to shadow teleport. But what you might not think about when it comes to her stealth is her power of invisibility. Yes, she can turn invisible. This power comes from her telekinesis skills. Although it's not often seen, she has used it before in the comics. This, combined with her astral projection abilities, makes her an even more stealthy mutant than you might initially suspect, though as we've seen, it doesn't do anything when it comes to cloaking her from Mr. Fantastic. Unsurprisingly, trying to use invisibility powers to sneak up on a man who is married to the Invisible Woman is really, well, not the most effective way to use that ability. I'm sneaking and Reed Richards is like, I know you're here. I'm I'm used to invisible people, it's kind of my thing.
So with that in mind, let's get to it. Starting us off in at number 10, Miss Marvel powers. Once upon a time, Rogue permanently absorbed Carol Danvers' psyche and superhuman abilities when Danvers was Miss Marvel. As you can imagine, this screwed around quite a bit with Carol. Essentially, the two minds shared one body, but it gave Rogue a whole new set of abilities, including flight at wickedly fast speeds, the ability to repel bullets, superhuman strength, stamina, durability, reflexes, speed, and a precognitive sense. Damn. Not only did she gain her powers, but she also gained Carol's human Kree physiology, which made her incredibly resistant to most poisons and toxins. Eventually though, Charles Xavier was able to separate the two, but it has left a little bit of tension between Carol and Rogue over the years. Speaking of tension, up next at number 9, shapeshifting. Rogue has absorbed the powers of her adoptive mother Mystique a handful of times. But not for the reasons that you'd expect. While she did gain Mother Dearest's powers, Rogue touching Mystique was for other reasons. She wanted to better understand her mother. Adoptive mother, rather. As you know, Rogue doesn't just absorb abilities, but thoughts, memories, etc. In one case though, outside of the comics, we did get to see Rogue use Mystique's powers. Sort of. In the X-Men the Animated Series, after Rogue had absorbed Carol Danvers and the latter's psyche was becoming the more prominent of the two, she ended up using Mystique's powers to shapeshift into her previous body. You got a complicated past with your mother, so I'm just gonna use your mother's powers to make you look like me. Moving on to number 8, death. Prior to Rogue being able to control her powers, a lingering touch of hers could be deadly. Typically for those who had superpowers or were powerful mutants, her touch would cause damage and might even put them into a coma. But in the case of someone with a physiology like Carol Danvers, psyches were merged. But what about for a regular human? It's no bueno. Rogue's touch is practically the touch of death. For regular non-powered humans, Rogue's touch could very well be fatal, sucking their strength at an accelerated and alarming rate that our human bodies cannot handle. Moving on to less depressing territory, and at number 7, she can manipulate ice. Wonder whose powers she absorbed to get this little trick. If it wasn't already obvious, this skill set of Rogue's was the byproduct of touching X-Men teammate Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. It's a power that she's borrowed from Bobby on multiple occasions, not only for use in combat but for other means too. Bobby's ice manipulation powers, which might I add are Omega level mutant abilities, allow him to decrease the thermal energy around him in order to create ice structures. His creations will not break unless he wills them to. So you can imagine how this was useful for Rogue in Avengers vs. X-Men, when a whole lot of rebuilding was required after a failed attempt to use the Phoenix Force occurred. Moving on to another X-Men member here, in at 6, phasing. Okay, personally Kitty Pryde's phasing powers were always the mutant ability that I wanted growing up, so I am a big fan of this number. In Uncanny X-Men issue 194, the X-Men are almost bested by villain Nimrod when Kitty Pryde has an idea, and it's a good one too. Out for the count and being carried around by Rogue, Kitty decides to push her head up against Rogue's, forcing the mutant to absorb her powers, psyche, thoughts, and memories of her teammate. This spawns a greater plan in which Rogue then absorbs Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler's powers, using them to attack the sinister robot, smashing it to bits. Although Nimrod ends up rebuilding itself and teleporting away, it's still a pretty big win for the X-Men. Up next, number 5, weather manipulation. Storm is the second Omega level mutant on our list whose powers Rogue has absorbed, and she's another teammate whose powers have been borrowed on more than one occasion. Now the first wasn't actually borrowed. They were in battle against one another and Rogue was still doing that whole villain thing. She would fight Storm and steal her powers. Guess that kind of stuck with Aurora, because the next time that Rogue would find herself borrowing the weather manipulator's abilities was when Storm had to offer her powers willingly to Rogue in Uncanny X-Men issue 185. But it wasn't for combat, and it wasn't used the way that Rogue used Bobby's powers. Instead, it was in order to give Rogue a new perspective, opening the young mutant up to trusting Storm and seeing the beauty that the Earth had to offer, versus Rogue's prior cynically inclined outlook. It brought them closer together. Moving on to number 4, reality warping. So Scarlet Witch is arguably one of the most powerful superheroes in the Marvel Universe, albeit being slightly unstable at times. Rogue has stolen her powers on a few occasions, but perhaps the most memorable one took place in Uncanny Avengers issue 2, volume 2. After absorbing Wanda's powers, Rogue had some trouble with it, the power being what she called a, I quote, confusing idiot power. She was unable to make use of the abilities right from the get-go, and she couldn't control it either. Nothing actually happens with these powers aside from her hands glowing. Why? Well, Wanda explains it as Rogue lacking the imagination to use her reality warping powers. Kinda savage, but does make sense. Up next at 3, physical trait absorption. We mentioned this ability in our intro, but we want to talk about the extent of this power of Rogue's, because often it's entirely involuntary. During the comic Fantastic Four vs. the X-Men issue 4, Rogue absorbs the Human Torch's powers. Now this doesn't only give her pyrokinesis, it gives her his fiery form that allows her to fly. While Rogue does make use of this for a brief period of time, she notes that this fire form completely obliterated her outfit, which was not fireproof. She could not control that. Sue Storm ends up using her powers to create a force field around Rogue, snuffing her out and leaving her completely naked. It's a bit of a distant shot of her naked though, so. Another time Rogue has absorbed a physical trait was when she absorbed Nightcrawler's powers on an alternate Earth. Earth 161. In this case, Rogue's powers did something a little unconventional. She ended up switching powers and appearance entirely with Kurt, which gave her blue skin and a tail, along with his abilities. This did not go over too well with Rogue. She kinda resented it. Up next, number 2, Rogue God of Thunder. Once upon a time, Rogue smushed her hand into Thor's face and stole his powers. I love the drawing in this panel. This was back in Rogue's more villainous early days, specifically in Avengers Annual Issue 10 when she faced off against Earth's mightiest heroes. Thor swoops Rogue off her feet, declaring he, I quote, knowest not who thou art. What follows is Rogue metaphorically slapping him, stating her name, and saying that he had her eternal gratitude for handing her victory on the proverbial silver platter, because she stole his powers and was about to whoop everyone. Oh, Thor. Sometimes his naivety is wonderfully endearing. And finally, in at number 1, she can recall past powers. In X-Men Volume 2, issue 107 from 2000, Rogue's powers mutated further. Not on their own though. This was due to an induced mutation by a telepathic mutant Skrull named Zakon. Now think of her as the Skrull equivalent of Charles Xavier. While it was not intentional, Zakon actually attempted to activate Rogue's powers to evade bounty hunters. The side effects allowed for Rogue to recall previously absorbed powers. And because of this, Rogue found herself having difficulty controlling which powers manifested when, occasionally boasting Wolverine's claws and Cyclops' optic blasts. This was temporary though.
Number 10, procreation. Venom and Eddie are, in a sense, the parents of Carnage, who was born while the two were in prison, sharing a room with Cletus Cassidy. The symbiote found itself giving birth while under duress, while Eddie's life was threatened by Cassidy, who had decided to shank Brock to death. Cassidy ended up being wounded, and Carnage bonded with Cletus through his bloodstream. While Venom isn't the only symbiote capable of procreating, it's still pretty impressive and bizarre when it comes to its ability to do so. While technically asexual, the way that Eddie Brock and Venom are painted as a couple who end up having another little one on the way is even more strange, while still somehow being oddly charming. The two have another little one together, giving birth to the symbiote Sleeper. In fact, Eddie even bonds with the Venom symbiote while it's giving birth to help give it strength, as the birth process can be quite taxing, risking his own life in the process. Eddie and Venom sitting in a tree. Number 9, matter generation. While some might think of Venom as some kind of alien Spider-Man ripoff, the abilities that it is able to mimic of Spider-Man's are not all the symbiote is capable of. Venom can actually produce organic webbing, but that's only for those who are, interested in webbing. In fact, the weapons it is capable of producing rely heavily on the host that it finds itself bonded with. For example, when bonded with Flash Thompson, who lost his legs while serving in the military, it created for him new legs. And while bonded to Matt Gargan, the symbiote generated a weaponized scorpion tail reminiscent of Matt Gargan's original tail that he had as Scorpion. This is also why Venom's look often changes slightly from host to host. It becomes whatever it and its host needs it to be, or just wants it to be. Number 8, flight. After his run-in with Null, Venom gained a few extra superpowers. One of these was a power of flight. It became capable of producing a giant set of demon or bat-like wings. While the wings definitely make Venom look really cool, this power doesn't seem one that is super necessary for the symbiote, who can already wall crawl and web swing. In fact, it's surprising that Venom was not able to grow wings before this, considering the symbiote can shapeshift and has had some insight into the power of flight when it was bonded with Carol Danvers' Captain Marvel. But apparently, flying was just always something that was a no-go for it. Until, I guess it wasn't. Yay, demon wings. I mean, who doesn't want demon wings, so let's be honest. So that is pretty cool. Number 7, can bond with anything. While the Venom film starring Tom Hardy may have left audiences thinking that symbiosis is a complex process, wherein the symbiote is very selective in terms of whether or not it can even establish a bond with the host, some of the comics would contradict this train of thought. Venom definitely appears to have preferences, usually preferring to bond with Eddie Brock above all others, but the process itself is apparently not quite as selective. According to one comic, you don't have to even be living or sentient to bond with Venom, let alone be specifically compatible. In Venom Volume 2, issue 36, the symbiote bonded with a freaking car. Yeah, an old rusty car. Granted, he was also still bonded with Flash Thompson at the time, but that really only makes this ability even crazier. So you can bond with an object and with a person. It's just a lot of bonding. Number 6, unlimited potential. Due to Venom's genetic memory, Venom can reproduce the powers of those it bonds with, even after it's no longer bonded with said host. And there appears to be no limit in regards to how many people the symbiote can bond with. As such, as time goes on and it acquires a variety of different hosts, it will become even more and more powerful and strong, inheriting different abilities from those supers that it bonds with. Thus far, Venom has already bonded with a variety of different heroes and villains throughout comic book history, in alternate universes as well as in the main continuity of Earth 616, including but not limited to Hulk, Wolverine, Thor, Drax, Groot, and Captain Marvel. It even bonded with the Human Torch, but of course it ran away quickly after Johnny went to test what the suit would be like with this flame on, and understandably so. It was probably pretty terrified. Poor Venom. I guess Johnny didn't know that its weakness was fire? I don't know. Number 5, telepathic link. You would think the Venom would use that to actually tell the Human Torch, like, maybe don't turn your flame on. Anyways, looking even beyond the typical telepathic communication that you would expect the Venom symbiote to be capable of from watching it talk to its host without whispering a word, the symbiote also remains connected to its homeworld and race via telepathic connection. In fact, its telepathic link is strengthened by the amount of time it spends with a host. Don't believe me? Just look at its connection to Eddie Brock, probably the host that Venom has spent the most time bonded to. At one point, Brock was able to hear its telepathic scream from across the state of New York. Now, that is a strong link. Not as strong as its connection to Clintar, which is like forever away, but still pretty strong. Number 4, camouflage. In the 1990s, Venom was given a type of power in addition to its more well-known shapeshifting abilities. It was given the power to not only change shape, but change color, and even sort of change state with the power of camouflage. At one point, Venom even used this ability to pursue Spider-Man underwater, becoming clear and blending into the background of the water, in essence actually seeming to become the water. This power surprised even Peter, as it also seemed to allow Venom to breathe underwater as well. In the Carnage Unleashed storyline, Venom used this camouflage ability again, transforming to blend itself in with a train after being struck by it. Oh, the 90s, where anything was possible. Number 3, extrasensory perception. You know that phrase, "I have eyes in the back of my head"? A term often used by parents and teachers who want to intimidate you into thinking they can see you at all times. Well, when Venom says it, it means it. The symbiote, of course, does not have literal eyes on the back of its head. In fact, although its mask has weird eye-like shapes on it, it would appear as though the symbiote doesn't really truly have eyes at all. It appears to operate through heightened senses, which allow it to perceive the full 360 degrees of its surroundings, as though every surface of the suit were actually covered in eyes and ears. This allows it to protect its host by warning it to danger, similar to, but different than, Spider-Man's Spidey sense, which the suit never seemed to actually adapt. We see the effects of this ability in Venom issue 1 when Flash is bonded with the symbiote as Agent Venom. Agent Venom uses its tendrils and its sensory perception to hold aim and fire guns at a slew of people who are attacking from behind. Pretty impressive, you know, it's just like, I know where they are, I got this. Number 2, enter the web, the online kind. During Carnage Unleashed, not only did Venom reveal how convincing its camouflage abilities were, but it also revealed another weirdly unique ability, which it also shared with Carnage. The ability to travel into computers and by extension, the internet. After Cletus Cassidy escapes Ravencroft to kill people through a video game based on his life, Venom is forced to work against him to try and stop its offspring, Carnage. This ends up in a high-speed chase that moves to the digital world when Carnage escapes through a computer and into the internet. How does one move, though, into the internet? Well, this was the 90s, so the answer, of course, was revealed in both symbiotes turning to goo and seemingly slipping into a computer in order to move through an online network, because that's the way the internet works. That's how it worked in the 90s, maybe. Everything's connected by cords or something. God, that would be a mess. Ugh. Number 1, humanoid form. When we think of Venom, we often think of it as a combo deal, a marriage of the symbiote and usually a humanoid, like Eddie Brock or Peter Parker or Flash Thompson, or, you know, any other of the many supers, villains, humans, and apparently occasionally inanimate objects that Venom has bonded with. In fact, it has been established in the comics that Venom actually needs a host to survive, often feeding off nutrients from its host, kinda like a parasite. Eddie Brock even eats a ton of chocolate to help keep his symbiotic friend well fed, in a way, through the phenylethylamine that the snacks actually causes one's brain to produce, which the symbiote feeds off of. However, this isn't always the case. While Venom is weaker without a host, the symbiote has now been shown to be able to survive on its own for a short period of time. It takes on its own humanoid form as the suit, but simply without anyone inside. However, this does tend to quickly wear down the symbiote's stamina, and it can only manage to survive alone for about 12 hours before it starts to risk its own well-being. Still a pretty cool power, but can't do it forever. Be too dangerous. Also, miss Eddie Brock too much. It's one true love. Number 10. Symbiosis. We learn in the series Web of Venom, Venom, that Wolverine was actually one of the first mutants to ever merge with a symbiote. He ends up linking his mind with the symbiote, who recalls memories of Nick Fury torturing it, causing them to attack Fury. Eventually the symbiote would be separated from Wolverine, though it would later speak its first words seemingly as a result of their time together, and would save Logan's life while merged with another being. In the older Spider-Man game from 2008, Spider-Man Web of Shadows, it was also revealed that Wolverine was able to achieve symbiosis, inciting a fight between the player as Spider-Man and this version of Wolverine, merged with one of the symbiotes. Venom Wolverine. Number 9. Lycanthropy. That's right, at one point Wolverine was an actual wolf. Well, a werewolf. He was transformed by a woman named Nyssa, who saw in him her soulmate and wanted to turn him so that he would always be with her. Logan had all kinds of interesting and conflicting feelings for her, as he was with Mariko at the time, but still found himself attracted to Nyssa, who appealed more to his animalistic side. Nyssa bit him, and Logan found himself joining the pack, which was led by her brother, Malik, the Alpha. This version of Logan literally caused him to transform into a wolf, which he described as like being in a state where you could see yourself but were unable to control yourself, sorta like watching TV. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your thoughts on Wolverine, his healing factor eventually healed him of his lycanthropy. Number 8. Memory suppression. If you know Wolverine's history, you're probably astonished to discover just how much he seems to have survived. He's been tortured countless times, suffered an insane amount of loss, and almost every event from his backstory is filled with a dramatic amount of tragedy. Yet he manages to persevere. Sure, human minds are capable of dealing with great amounts of mental trauma and stress, but the amount of sorrow and loss that Wolverine is forced to deal with is definitely on a super level. How does he stay sane? His healing factor. Yep, in the comics, this is why he also suffers from memory loss. His healing factor causes mental scar tissue to literally cover up painful memories by building up around his trauma center in his brain. This is even referred to in the X-Men film Days of Future Past, which swapped out Wolverine for Kitty Pryde when it came to who would be doing the time traveling, using the mental capacity of his healing factor as the excuse for why Wolverine would be sent back, as time travel is apparently very hard on your mind. In the comics, we discover that this is also why Logan does not remember his life as James Howlett, or his childhood friend, which he accidentally killed, Rose. Number 7. Vampirism. Wolverine becomes transformed by the vampire army after being bitten. While being a werewolf seems to be something his healing factor was capable of curing, vampirism isn't. His vampire side warps his mind, turning him against his fellow X-Men, and seemingly making him power hungry. Not too surprising, to be honest, as being a vampire basically grants Wolverine even stronger superpowers than before, and armed with his healing factor makes him almost undefeatable. Still, he only remains a vampire for a short while. Cyclops had his blood tested for immunity against the vampire virus, but while he did this, he also had Logan secretly injected with nanites that would disable his healing factor. Boom. Scott Summers activates those nanites when he goes up against Logan in order to cure him of said vampirism. While appearing to be pleased at regaining control of his free will and free of his vampiric nature, Logan also seems severely displeased at the fact that Scott did all of this without his permission. Come on, Scott, you should know, don't inject people with nanites before you ask them. Gotta get some permission first. Number 6. Phoenix Force. During the series Astonishing Spider-Man and Wolverine, Logan finds himself teamed up with Peter Parker, as the two are forced to involuntarily ping-pong around time together. One of their adventures sees them go up against a planet that appears to be Dr. Doom. Wolverine gets his hands on the Phoenix gun and sacrifices himself to use it to blast apart Planet Doom. He is later resurrected and ends up attracting the attention of the Phoenix Force, which possesses him. Though he succumbs to the power momentarily, Logan's mind appears strong enough to keep the Force at bay, and he even manages later to resist it, giving Jean a run for her money somewhat. Like, geez, apparently it's that easy to just be like, no, not today, Phoenix Force. But only if you're Wolverine. You've like a scar tissue brain. It's actually surprising that his brain isn't huge when you think about it, with all that scar tissue. Number 5. Lie detection. The combination of Logan's heightened senses allow him to operate as a fantastic lie detector. He is able to recognize superheroes' secret identities by matching their scent, no matter how much Peter Parker wants to try and insist that Logan has it all wrong. Peter Parker's like, no, I'm not Spider-Man, oh no. And he can also detect the slightest changes in someone when they are sharing information. A change in heartbeat, tone of voice, or the fact that you could start to slightly sweat could be picked up by Wolverine and help him determine if you were lying or not. Probably another reason he is considered an expert spy. In other words, when confronted by Logan, you probably just want to be honest with him, lest you risk him going into a rage as a result of your perceived dishonesty. Ugh. Number 4. Hot claws. Sounds so ridiculous when I say it like that. After being resurrected, Logan found that he had access to a new ability as a result of going into his berserker rage. When Logan goes berserk, he becomes more animalistic and impulsive, less in control of himself and his emotions. This can be seen in the comics when Wolverine feels an intense sense of betrayal or loss, which sometimes sets him off into a rage. Think of the Barbarian class in Dungeons & Dragons, sorta like that. When he was resurrected, he found that going berserk would also cause his claws to go hot. They have been revealed to be hot enough to light fuel in the comics, and I imagine would be like fighting someone with a set of hot pokers attached to their arms. Pretty terrifying. But at least any wounds you received fighting Berserk Wolverine would be instantly cauterized, so that's a plus. You're not gonna bleed out probably. Still don't want to fight Berserk Wolverine, that seems crazy. Don't do it. Number 3. Hulk. Wolverine even had the Hulk's powers for a time. I know, though he sort of had to sacrifice his smarts for them, and kind of received them against his will. But still, he had them. After the leader and Dr. Aliana Alba get a hold of Wolverine and Bruce Banner, they transform them to take on Weapon H, Clay Cortez, known as Hulkverine. They become Hulkverines in their own right, but their mental capacity is reduced, turning them into rage-filled smashing and slashing machines. Snick, snick. Wolverine also has his hot claws in this form, and as such is a frightening foe to come up against while hulked out. He has no idea what's going on, he's got hot claws, he's big and green. Scary. Number 2. Feral state. The 90s was an admittedly weird time for the comics. It was during this time we were introduced to a side of Wolverine that we had not seen yet, and it was revealed that his claws were in fact simply made out of bone. We learned this after Magneto stripped his skeleton of adamantium. This also triggered a mutation in Wolverine wherein he began to resort to a more feral and bestial state as time progressed, even losing the appearance of his nose in some panels, looking more like the animal he gets his codename from, a Wolverine. He would eventually regain his adamantium skeleton and return to the Wolverine we knew before. Not necessarily calm, but more logical than that of his feral state self. It would appear that this ability was only accessible when the adamantium is removed from his skeleton, and yet we also see Logan as James when his claws are merely bone, and yet this doesn't seem to be as great of an issue. In other words, this seemed to be a power state that writers would rather we forget about. Probably like Spider-Man's Clone Saga. Just kidding, that was a cheap blow. Also terrible thing in the 90s though. Number 1. Telepathic resistance. Similar to how his mental suppression works, Wolverine also has a wall of armor in his mind when it comes to psychic attacks. Originally in the comics this was explained as him having level 9 psi shields installed by Professor Xavier, but over time his ability to shield himself from psychic damage began to become even greater. As seen in the 2003 Wolverine volume issue 46. Emma is even ready to disregard the shields that Xavier put inside Logan's mind, declaring that she could more than handle them as a level 10 telepath. However, later she seems unable to prevent Wolverine from charging Scott in X-Men Original Sin, and Logan shares that his psychic scar tissue is to thank for that. His healing factor has helped him to build up a resistance after previous attacks on his mind. So the more you try to psychically attack him, the stronger he will become against psychic attacks, apparently. Pretty powerful considering that he's mostly a strength-based mutant.